Does anyone else feel like the sky is falling?
I say the sky is falling.
As if it weren't hard enough to live through a pandemic, crazy political climate, and now Russia's war on Ukraine, we have all of these articles and people putting out videos screaming about hyperinflation. Now, is hyperinflation possible? Absolutely, anything is possible. But the bigger question is it plausible? And I say, no way! We're going to need to start by discussing inflation before we can talk about hyperinflation. And we'll start by defining what inflation is. In simple terms, it's the decreased purchasing power of money over time. What a dollar can purchase tomorrow is going to be less than it is today. For example, you probably pay around $3.70 for a gallon of milk today. Now, if we wind up having an inflation rate of around 10% at the end of 2022, that gallon of milk will now cost $4.07. The average annual inflation rate for the past 2 decades has been 2%, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, hyperinflation is exactly what it sounds like. It's inflation hyped up on steroids. Or if you're a Russian figure skater, it's a concoction of heart medication that you took from your grandfather. So what exactly is hyperinflation? If an economy has an inflation that increases 50% or more a month for an entire year, then you have hyperinflation. Said another way, this would be a yearly inflation rate of 12,974%. So in a state of hyperinflation, that gallon of milk that was $3.70 at the beginning of the year would then cost $483.74 at the end of an inflationary year. Once again, anything is possible, but I really don't think it's plausible. For context, let's dive into what causes inflation, and it really comes down to just 3 forces. That first one is excessive currency. The second is the demand pull effect, and the third is the cost push effect. I'll go deeper into each of these, but I'm going to start with currency. It's unanimous amongst economists that inflation is mostly caused by the excessive printing of money. With that in mind, there is this statistic that everyone is throwing around that 80% of the existing US currency has been printed in the past 24 months. So here we are where the Fed has been printing money like it's been going out of style for the past 2 years, and that happens to be the leading cause for inflation under normal circumstances. Why would the Fed actively choose to print money knowing that that exacerbates inflation? So here's an interesting fact. The Fed didn't physically print more money. Technically, the Treasury Department is responsible for printing physical money, and the Fed manages the circulation of those funds. So far, the Fed has put in an order with the Treasury to physically print 6.9 billion notes in 2022, which is a decrease of 0.1 billion over 2021. So why is everyone saying the Fed is printing excessive amounts of money? It's because it's digital funny money. The Fed is using a reference of money via computer keystrokes to purchase assets from financial institutions. The Fed manages the money, so if they say they have funds to buy assets, they are technically printing their own money to obtain those assets. In turn, this frees up capital with financial institutions to take more risks by lending out more money to the rest of us. These are actions that act like stoking the fire to keep it lit, aka the economy continues to grow. Now, an important detail I want all of you to take away from this video is this. The Fed isn't simply printing money, but they are purchasing assets. And those assets hold value and they can be sold. Because the Fed is purchasing bonds and assets, there is now surplus of funds that exceeds the production of goods, and inflation is a result. Moving to the second leading cause of inflation, which is demand pull effect, which occurs when demand is greater than the economy's ability to produce. A simple example is the lack of new vehicles because of the chip shortage. There is pent-up demand on vehicles to the point where used vehicles have now gone up 30 to 40% from the prior year. I think we can all agree that this has been a widespread issue throughout the pandemic and all of the supply chain issues we've been having. And you're in luck. I have a video where I covered the supply chain issues extensively from an insider's point of view. So go check it out. The next cause is the cost push effect. This is the most common form of inflation due to increased wages and raw materials. With labor shortages across the nation, wages have begun to skyrocket. Raw materials such as fuel impacts every aspect of the supply chain, and it was up 46% for 2021. And I expect it to climb another 66% for 2022 with an average of $5 a gallon. All right, let's cover those 3 areas that cause inflation once more. The first is excess currency. Yep, we've got that. The second is demand pull effect, where the production is lagging demand. So yeah, we have that too. And the third is the cost push effect, where costs have gone up. So absolutely, it looks like we have all 3. So in the sport of bowling, if you're willing to call it a sport, when you have 3 strikes, it's called a turkey. So it looks like we've got 3 strikes and we are hitting on all 3 of the inflationary forces. Let's be honest with ourselves. I'm going to call this the wild turkey inflationary force. And you're probably asking yourself, why wild turkey? Because you're going to need one of these to get through it. So bottoms up. Oh, I can't believe I'm doing this. I don't want to smell it. Gosh, that's so bad. As bad as this may sound, there's a logical reason for why it's happening. There was a pandemic, our supply chain was completely broken, and people are slow to get back into the workforce. To me, that means there's hope because there's a definitive cause. Now that we better understand inflation, let's review some instances where hyperinflation occurred and why I don't believe it's going to be happening in the near term. The most recent example of hyperinflation occurred in Venezuela in 2018, where it saw inflation at 65,000%. Prices were doubling in a matter of days, and at that time, unemployment in Venezuela was at 20%, and the government had been printing in excess of money. The government also set the price of food and medicine below cost with hopes that it would help its citizens. Unfortunately, it was set so low that domestic manufacturers had to close production, and Venezuela was then forced to import those goods at an even higher cost. So yes, they were printing money, and they had a major cost push, and they had the third demand pull effect. Or as I like to put it, they had the wild turkey inflationary effect, which I don't recommend. It's not very good. Now, some people think this could never happen in the US, and they would be wrong because it's already happened. During the Civil War, the Confederate Army had to print money to pay for their war efforts. They were physically printing money with no assets against them, and there was no productivity from these actions either. It was printed solely to pay bills, and in turn, the result was hyperinflation, among other things, which we're not going to go there. Hyperinflation has occurred in several countries, such as Zimbabwe in 2008, Yugoslavia in 1994, Greece in 1944, and Germany in 1923. In almost every case, hyperinflation was caused by severe government mismanagement, a major conflict, or a war. In the examples of war, the countries that had hyperinflation had little or no economy, very little production, and they were printing money simply to pay for the war effort. The act of printing money has to have some form of productivity tied to it, or inflation begins to increase and it simply gets out of control. Given our current environment, this could easily play out with Russia, and quite honestly, I hope it does. Now back to the root of this video and why I believe we aren't going to experience hyperinflation. So yes, the Fed is printing money, and we have the demand pull effect, and we have the cost push effect, which is impacting all of our lives. But the Fed will raise interest rates to stop printing money, which will slow down the economy. This creates a barrier to borrow money, and it reduces the desire to spend money, which should result in inflation going down. As I'd said before, in every situation where hyperinflation occurred, it was driven by mismanagement by governments and printing money simply to pay for wars or conflicts with no productivity tied to it. I don't believe that's happening in the US today or anytime soon. Our inflation has ballooned because we have pent-up demand which exceeds supply. Costs on raw materials and fuel have skyrocketed, and we have a labor shortage. Now, there's one thing I didn't cover, and that's corporate greed. Companies are raking in profits by overinflating their prices. And I'll give you an example with Tyson Foods. In the first quarter of 2022, Tyson reported a gross profit of $2 billion compared to $1.17 billion in Q1 2021. That is an increase of 71% in gross profit. Here's the clincher. Their volume of product that they had sold was flat between Q1 2021 and 2022. They sold about the same amount of product, but they jacked up all their prices. Because on top of all of this, they informed all of their customers, retailers, distributors, etc., that they were going to be raising their costs and also pulling back on their marketing funds. In the business world, marketing funds is a fancy way of saying back-end money that really brings down their cost of goods to make them more competitive. I promise I'll make a separate video just on vendor funding, which is going to be somewhat eye-opening for many of you. But my point is this, in my opinion, they are ripping us all off. I know this firsthand because I was literally having conversations about this with Tyson not even 6 months ago. In 2021, it was great that Tyson gave out frontline workers an additional $50 million in bonuses, which equated to about a 2% bonus for all of them, and yet the executives received about an extra 20% bump in their total annual compensation. The chairman of the board, John Tyson, took home a total of $13.7 million, which was an increase of $2.5 million from the prior year. His bonus was up 104% from 2020. Tyson states that they had higher costs in 2021, but their earnings release tells a very different story. Wait. Let me get this straight. His bonus went up 104% and they didn't sell any more product and they didn't reduce any of their costs? Yeah, seriously. What the funk? That's how I describe the smell of blue cheese. But you know what? It tastes amazing. You know what else is amazing? Hitting that like button. So yes, I believe that corporate greed definitely plays a role in inflation. To bring it all home, our inflation increases are driven by the pandemic, and I love that there's a definitive cause because we can work with that. The sooner we can manage the pandemic and have our workforce balance itself out, then the sooner that inflation can begin to drop. So I guess, grab yourself one of these and buckle up for the next 12 months. Cheers. Gosh, why did I do that to myself? Oh. What? Great suggestion. Where was that? I don't know, 5 minutes ago.